Well, welcome, greetings, and thank you for taking the time and coming by and checking out my little presentation. I had an exhibition in July of 2022 at Gammage Auditorium, a building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, to showcase some work, brand new work, as well as some recent work. And I wanted to put together this PowerPoint presentation to give you a sense of what that exhibition was like for those that couldn't attend the actual opening. It's a real honor to be able to show work in a Frank Lloyd Wright design building. It also presents some rather unique challenges. One of them being, I would have to say, the biggest challenge is working with a curved wall. Not that wall, but a curved wall. And it was a real challenge, but something I really wanted to do, and I was very much looking forward to doing this. And I came up with a solution that I think was effective. And I also want to thank those at ASU and at Gammage Auditorium for making this process a really smooth one and allowing me the opportunity to display my work there. It's something I really appreciate greatly. This is the curved wall in question, and I wanted to create fine art in architecture where the fine art actually worked with the architecture. And my solution was to create a thematic set of works collectively titled the 19th Avenue Book of Hours. And this is sort of the first phase of that project. And each individual painting would have an individual poem to go with them. A few of them already do, a few have yet to be written, so this is very much a work in progress. But what this exhibition gave me the chance to do was debut a brand new body of work that had never been seen before. So all of these small paintings, and they all measured about 15 inches by 15 inches, are all brand new, and they are like each individual story. And what made this exhibition truly a challenge for me was creating representational work after working abstractly for a long period of time. So I really wanted to do something that was much more representational. This is also one of the paintings from the newer body of work. And these two paintings here, this one, titled Pink Flamingo, it has several different titles, but Pink Flamingo, and this one, Pink Flamingo as well, represent older work that I created some time ago. Not a long time ago, but a few years back. And they were dealing with the pink flamingo as a theme for more serious work. And the painting over here that's marked in yellow, it should be red, right? But yellow, here we go. This particular painting was actually acquired at the end of the exhibition, so it has a new home in the valley. I'm very happy about that, and that was really a nice little icing on the cake to see that painting go to a new home. So that was really nice. At the very end of the exhibition, when the exhibition was taken down, this piece was actually sold. This is how the work was displayed on the curved wall, and what I wanted to do was create these small intimate paintings that gave you a sense of looking into a window into a self-contained world. And that's what I wanted to do with each of these individual paintings. And this is how they were displayed with the painting on these wonderful wires that my husband Bruce Purcell put together. And then the tags that I created. So it was a nice simple look with lots of space in between because I felt these paintings needed a lot of room to expand and be seen. So there was quite a bit of space between the paintings, which was a real luxury. And I really liked having them displayed in this way. They also had the feel of being windows inside of a bigger building. And I thought that really worked with the architecture. So I really wanted to create something that was very site specific, but also individual paintings that could stand on their own. Here's another example of the curved wall and how this all looked. And they were hung relatively high, which I wanted them to be at eye level. So I wanted people to look up at them a little bit. So it worked out the way I really wanted them to work. And we hung the entire exhibition, believe it or not, in about an hour, which was really breakneck speed. We had a window, and we really wanted to take advantage of that. We were really organized, and so we had everything up for this whole exhibition in about an hour, which is 17 paintings. This is one of the featured paintings. It's called Tristan and Isolde, and it's taken from the medieval story of Tristan and Isolde. And here's the entire painting. And the story of Tristan and Isolde in a nutshell is Tristan is a brave warrior, and he's transporting his uncle's fiancée across the waters to Ireland to be married. And the story goes, I think it's Ireland. At any rate, the story goes she falls madly in love with Tristan, and they have this affair under the king's nose. And the king is informed that they're lovers, but he doesn't believe the story at all, and they successfully carry on a relationship. Unfortunately, Tristan dies, and Isolde goes into irreconcilable grief. And that's the story of Tristan and Isolde. And it's a classic story, and it's actually older than the story of King Arthur. So if you hear the story of Guinevere and Sir Lancelot du Lac and their story, it's very much based on the story of Tristan and Isolde. It's very much a medieval story that was retold many times with many different tellings and many different variations. A friend of mine did some research on the subject and found all these interesting little sub-stories that add more detail to the original story. So it's a theme I really wanted to work with, and this was my ultimate take on the story, with Tristan lying in state with his gloves on, the warrior gloves, and Isolde in irreconcilable grief to the point where you can't see her face. Now, the inspiration for this painting came from several different sources, several different drawings I created before this one was even started, and I kind of combined a lot of different stories together, different images together, to create one that I thought was very definitive, along with my own little flourishes. Like, for example, the hair and the ribbon in her hair. This was all something I concocted. The covering of her face came from a drawing that I saw where she was grieving. You couldn't see her face at all. Her long blonde hair covered her entire face. So I covered part of her face with that idea of grief so horrible that you can't see her eyes. And Tristan, I gave red hair, a crown, and this candle that came from another painting of this scene, much more elaborate. I incorporated it, and then I abstracted a mask, a helmet, and put that in there. And then I put the cross on there as symbolic of the Crusades. So it's all very much a modern take on a medieval theme. Chair is an interesting painting. It's something I had wanted to do for a very, very long time, but wasn't sure how to go about doing it. So I came up with the idea of painting an electric chair, and the idea behind that electric chair was to talk about the idea of the judgments we make of ourselves and the punishment we sometimes administer to ourselves, sometimes knowingly and unknowingly. This is very much a psychological painting, and it was very much about dealing with bipolar disorder, borderline, panic attacks, and living with the aftermath of some of that. Now, the brain here, this little brain on a piece of paper, represents the mind, the soul, and this burial ground in the earth represents the end of it all, the finality of life. Kind of like my little take on the vanitas of rather older art, the idea of letting you know the impermanence of life itself, the tomb. So it was kind of a dark painting, painted in very, very bright colors. And I also included these streaks here of blood that were very subtle. I didn't want them to be too obvious, of the blood that we shed in our own lives, the pain that we suffer, and our judgments as a result of that pain. So it's really very much a psychological painting where the chair almost becomes a substitute for a person. And I created this sunny sky with a very disturbed sun with black lines around it to kind of emphasize the idea of the optimism that even in the darkest hour, there's some optimism, there's something to take away, there's some lesson to be learned from all of this, that it isn't all for naught. So even though it's a very dark painting, it's a very light one, hopeful one in some respects too, in a subtle way. This painting I thought was going to be exercised from the show, but no one was disturbed by it apparently enough to have it removed, and yet I thought it was one of the more darker paintings I've ever created, but I wanted to create it in light colors. Now there's a reason why I like dealing with dark themes and light colors, is because it adds another tone and adds another layer. One of the things I loved are musical compositions that are very beautifully melodic, but their intention is very dark to express very dark feelings. Another great way of putting it, I like to think of it as a song where the lyrics are very dark, but the music is very buoyant, poetic, even jubilant, but the ideas being expressed are very dark ones. And that tension between bright colors, a sunny painting, and a darker theme, I think makes the heaviness of the theme even heavier, as opposed to having just dark colors on top of a dark theme. It's that tension, and I really wanted to do that. And the painting style is a little rougher and rawer than what I'm normally used to doing. I did have perspective going on here, but it was very much eyeball perspective. And I took some liberties, and I even created some really unusual scenes with the background where the line here doesn't continue on, it stops. There's a line here, and then the background changes color here. They almost become little paintings. Every little rectangle becomes a little painting unto itself in a weird kind of way. And the playing of shadows and light. So Chair was a real experimental, like many of these pieces, advance forward. Joachim came about as a result of a friend of mine wanting me to do a self-portrait, but I didn't want to do a self-portrait. I wanted to do a psychological self-portrait that talked about moods, feelings of guilt, pressure, mainly pressure, even frustration, and also the joy and the difficulty of creativity, all linked up with the letter J. Here's the letter J here, and then I mirrored it. Something I do a lot in art, where I have like mirrors, where if you take a painting and you divide it down the middle, the two sides are like mirrors of each other. But there's always the unexpected. Whoops. Here we go. There's the mirror side of the painting, and things are balanced because I love composition. I love to have strong composition, so everything's kind of balanced out. Negative space versus the positive space, the lighter over here versus the darker over here, but still with bright colors illustrating the two. Lovers is another take on Tristan and Isolde. I really wanted to do this again, but this time as a stained glass painting. And to do it in a raw, more direct kind of way that I'm used to working. So I wanted to create this kind of stained glass imagery of the two lovers in an embrace. And I really worked on the hands. I really felt the hands had to be rendered a specific way, so they become a focus of the painting to me. Every time I look at this painting, the first place I'm drawn to are these hands. And the reason why hands became important to me is because I was very influenced by Egon Schiele, and he uses hands in a very expressive way, and I wanted to as well. And then this background of the stained glass, where there are layers and layers of thin paint to create this kind of stained glass effect, was really something I thought was effective. And then painting each of these individual bricks slightly different colors to create a brick wall, I thought became really interesting. And then my doorway, my enigmatic mysterious doorway, where, are they going to be looked upon? Are they going to be found out? Are they going to be discovered? And then, of course, this burial ground in the earth, the idea that this is the inevitable end of the story, that he's going to die. So it's a jubilant painting about love and the flush of love, but also a reminder of what the narrative is going to become with Tristan and Isolde. Phoenician Etude, and this is based on etudes in music. I use a lot of musical themes to describe the work. Was based on a scene I remember at night in Phoenix many years ago, going out and getting something to eat, and I remember seeing the arched architecture, the arches and the architecture, and so this was my memory of that. But I gave it kind of this weird, is it daytime, is it nighttime type of theme, where the sun could easily be construed as the moon, or the moon could be the sun, and the nighttime's kind of like there, but not really nighttime. So it's kind of like an ambiguous kind of daytime. And here is a nun's habit floating above it all. It kind of added another layer of mystery. All of these little symbolic elements that exist in this painting I thought were interesting. The canopy that hangs above, that floats above everything. And then here my stylized dumpster, where instead of being gray and full of trash, I made it into a colorful abstract painting of sorts. And then the street, and then the colorful pathway through that street. And everything's all just kind of put in different directions, going in different ways. So I thought Phoenician Etude was kind of an interesting combo of the abstract with the representational, and then the distortion of reality and perspective. I studied architecture at one time, so I love the idea of these really unusual perspectives. And then here was my street filled with these almost three-dimensional looking stones kind of distributed amongst the street. Another influence on this was De Chirico, another artist that I really enjoy and appreciate. Ruth was originally designed to be a homage to Kata Kollwitz, and I will do that at some point, finish it, but instead it turned into a portrait of a friend of mine whose work I really admired quite greatly. And the emphasis on this was, again, the hands becoming very representational, but also very expressive. And I wanted to create a hand that looked like a hand, but was expressive of a hand, using light and dark. And I didn't have a model for any of this. I didn't have a 3D model. I just had a picture of Kata Kollwitz. And then I transformed it into a portrait of a friend. It just changed. And it's also based on a photograph that I actually saw of this person many years ago. So I'm pulling on memories, and I'm pulling on, this self-portrait of Kata Kollwitz to create a portrait of someone else. And the hand came from the original Kata Kovics drawing, but I rendered it in color instead of black and white. And then I created the sleeve and the repeating pattern here that almost becomes a painting unto itself. If you think about it, this painting really is a series of other paintings coming together. This window, it could be seen as another painting or a window. This piece here is a reference to the artist Louise Bourgeois and her organic pieces of art. And then the figure I thought was interesting, creating a model, but the model is bound, representational of the struggle and the bondage that comes with being an artist. Sometimes you feel like you are bound and struggling, trying to make the work, come up with the work, produce the work, and even trying to sell the work. You know, there's always that struggle that you feel sometimes imprisoned by. And here is yet another painting. So the whole painting is about the art of painting. And I even included, if you look here carefully, a little easel. There we go. Here's a little easel right there, delineated in red. It's kind of hidden. I love the idea of hiding things in paintings. And then my unusual foreground. The more I looked at this painting, the more I liked it. At the time I created it, I thought it had really fallen apart, and it was really experimental to put all of this symbolism, you know, having a female artist represent all artists, and then having the figure represent the struggle of the artist, and the artist working to depict. And what I thought was interesting was these two figures don't interact with each other. This figure exists in its own space, and her eyes are looking at something that's really out here. That's where her vision is. So what is she looking at? What is she thinking of? And I really wanted to give her face the sense of an expression of looking at something, that she was thinking of something. Tales is inspired by The Handmaid's Tale, and I really wanted to do a painting that expresses the frustrations and the difficulties and the horrors of living in such a place. But I wanted to do it in a very creative and very subtle way. And so there are lots of symbols here. This one really stands out over here. My habit, which came from a description of the habit used in The Handmaid's Tale in the book by Margaret Atwood. She has a very vivid description of the wings, and so I wanted to recreate that in this one. It's missing from the TV series, but they had wings to kind of block their vision. This piece right here is representative, really, almost, it could be a substitute self-portrait. This piece was based on a piece of sculpture I created some time ago, and I really wanted to recreate it again in a really different kind of way. So this was a reinterpretation of the sculpture rendered as a flat two-dimensional painting. And then the final piece was this figure here, which is really ambiguous. It's a nun's habit, you know, taken from Europe, and then the human body rendered almost as a machine, and the hand on a piece of paper. And over here is the bird representative to me of both love and freedom. So it's a complex painting of symbols coming together to represent the individual being caught between all these different forces. The priest is, I'm not so sure that there's a statement here as much as I wanted to be able to paint in a particular style. And I didn't really know how to go about doing it, but I love Alberto Giacometti's paintings of people. And I wanted to do something similar, but not quite as linear as Giacometti. And I wanted to use a little bit more color. So I made up a face. This was just a composite face taken from many different paintings. And I put them together in this particular work. And then what I did was I added a halo and then also a guillotine. The idea, again, of judgment and finality. And then I added these African Giacometti-esque inspired, Louise Bourgeois inspired sculptural pieces representing Africa and my own African roots. And I love how these little beads would become very symbolic too. They represent sort of, one of the reasons why I like this piece of jewelry so much is that it reminded me of this painting that I had done long before I ever received this. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's kind of presaged what would happen. And then this enigmatic figure over here that you're not sure what is going on, a very ghost-like image. So this whole painting was an experiment in putting together disparate elements to create a mysterious environment and a mysterious world. And then this big, huge chair that sits behind the figure, you know, the finality of the chair, the judgment, and of course, you know, the priest representing the church. And he looks rather ambivalent as he's clutching his Bible. I'm surprised this painting was shown too, because I didn't want to, this painting isn't really criticism of religion per se, but it is a comment on the judgment, the finality, and the uncertainty of making final judgments or proclamations. Because the church, to me, the Catholic Church, is a very interesting institution. It's both a supporter of education, sometimes a denier of education, and at the same time a depository where very intelligent people gathered. So to me, it's a unique institution in the world and the way that it operates. And I wanted to make a comment on that too. Not necessarily a judgment on religion per se, but just a comment on the finality of judgments and whether or not we're certain in the judgments that we make or the decisions that we make. This painting, Untitled, was a formal painting. And what I mean by formal is that it wasn't driven so much by a theme as it was driven by wanting to do different things in painting that I'd never done before. But in the end, it became sort of a psychological self-portrait and also a comment on psychology. And you can see that represented by the brain that's here, hanging by a wire, like the idea of your sanity hanging by a thin thread, and these disembodied hands that represent the creativity of the individual. So you could say this is sort of a psychological self-portrait. And I actually did include a little bit of a self-portrait right here. It's hidden. Me and my many, many hats that I like to wear. And then this Africanized mask, because I love African masks and I love the idea of the mask. And I took out the mouth, which was kind of interesting too, the idea of not being able to speak. So it's a painting about not being able to speak articulately. And yet here are all the things necessary to speak: a mouth, hands, a brain, eyes, but they're all disconnected from each other. I thought that became really interesting. And then my 4 candles represented sort of spirituality or thought. I think it's more thought than spirituality, the idea of thoughts being held in the distance, and and they're just dripping, wax. The idea of the thoughts just drifting away and drifting. And then the hyena representing the wildness, the untamed, the natural, juxtaposed against the man-made. So there are a lot of complex things. When I looked at the painting in the end, it was much more complicated than just a series of studies or me trying to explore what painting can do. Woodville is another painting that I wanted to create that was based in the medieval world of Elizabeth Woodville, who became Queen of England and was an actual commoner who became queen. Really interesting. And she's a pivotal figure in the War of the Roses during that period of British history. And she also becomes the great-grandmother of Henry VIII, which is kind of interesting. And she was a very strong, very determined woman, and also said to be quite beautiful. And I saw paintings of her, many different renderings, paintings of her, particularly one that was contemporary with her lifetime. And it had this really unusual kind of flat quality to it. So I wanted to incorporate that, but also I wanted to give her this keen intelligence. I wanted to create a painting that gave you a sense of a woman kind of on edge a little bit. Because this is a woman who watched her 2 sons, perish under very mysterious circumstances, the story of the 2 princes. So I wanted to create a woman who was dealing with both grief and aware of the world around her and dealing with all of this with this keen intelligence in addition to this very, classical kind of beauty. And then I really wanted to render the hands, and I spent an inordinate amount of time working on these hands. And I had never painted a painting quite like this before, where I brought together my abstractions with representationalism to create this unusual, surreal world. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. I thank you for indulging me on this little journey, and I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it, and all the images and all the content was created by me, so I'm the person to blame if it didn't work. Again, this whole presentation was very much an experiment along with the show itself, but I think experiments and stretching yourself are important for an artist to step outside of your comfort zone and do something a little different and see how that impacts the rest of your artistic oeuvre. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day, and I appreciate it. Thank you.